Go ahead. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the session tonight. We continue to talk about project management, and this is our third day. We kicked off with what is project management, and we started with looking at the different elements and the processes you follow if you write your proposal. And tonight we are going to look at monitoring and evaluation. And before we continue, I want to welcome and thank everyone that made the time, took the time, investing into their future by sitting on this course or just in the session. I would like you to type in the chat box if you are involved in any monitoring and evaluation program, or if you are working on any project, you can just give me a yes. If you want to, you can give me the title of the project. If you want to, you can tell me your position as well, but anything that will give an indication as to whether you are involved in any project at this moment, whether it's in government or private sector or NGO sector, civil society, whatever volunteer movement. If you are involved in any form of project, then you can just give me an indication in the chat box. Thank you very much. We are going to start off by looking at our learning objectives for tonight. We are going to look at the 5 W's and H around monitoring and evaluation. We are going to look at, discuss why M&E is important. We are also going to define it and the components of the monitoring and evaluation system and all the related terms, and suggest resources for each of those components. So we are just going to talk through the process of monitoring and evaluation. And as you can indicate to me whether you are working in the field or not, that will also be a good indication. If there's anything that I mentioned throughout that you feel you are learning from, then you might type it down, or any question or any comments are welcome tonight. Thank you so much. So once again, I'm Simonee, coming to you from Windhoek, Namibia, and I have been involved in project management for quite a number of years in my career. And the type of career I had, I entered government. I ended up in projects because it was part of the work that I was doing. And then I went into the private sector, and there also dealt with projects from a private sector perspective. First, I went into the fishing industry and then the mining industry. And then I entered the international donor or NGO sector. And that is my experience with project management. I'm also involved in community projects. I'm just giving you this information so that you can formulate your questions around the work that I'm doing and around what I'm explaining. I'm also involved in community projects. One of the projects is action against human trafficking, one of the challenges we have in our country. But I'm also involved in projects around young people, youth health and development programs, child and family programs, respectively. So just for you to understand where I am coming from. So tonight we are looking at the third part of project management, and that is monitoring and evaluation. The aim of this third part is also just to fill you up with all the information and what is needed for us to move on in projects. What are the key principles of monitoring and evaluation? And that is what we are going to look at first tonight. We need to understand that monitoring and evaluation is an integral part of program implementation and of project implementation. So whatever project, whatever program, there's monitoring involved. And when we talk monitoring, as much as I make examples of the international development sector or donor agencies and the projects we implement at community level, I also want us to think in terms of different sectors like private sector, corporate sectors. There's also monitoring involved, there's also controls involved. And it should be linked to the specific program objectives defined through the appraisal process and the program planning process. What am I telling you? When your project started or the particular program started, there was an appraisal process and there was a program planning process. So your monitoring and evaluation is always aligned with the very specific objectives of the project that you are working on, the institution that you are working on, the government sector that you are working in, or whatever NGO sector you are running, or your own business as well. And it should refer back to existing baseline data or begin with a baseline study. Yesterday, I made an example and there was a question, and I indicated that some projects start with feasibility study, some projects start with baseline study. Baseline is very important when a project starts for the first time, because you need to do your research or you need to do your market research before you want to go into any project. When we talk of market research, we are not only looking at business projects or what the economy speaks of if we want to implement something, but you also look at the interest and the need on the ground for whatever you wish to implement. Many times we identify a need and we decide, I'm going to come up with a project. But as much as you wish to come up because you see people don't have food, it is always important to do a baseline study or baseline research. Some would do feasibility studies and or research study just to find out what is the need, what is the target population's need, what are the individual issues within. And that is what we are referring to when we say, when you do your monitoring and evaluation, it must always refer back to such. And it's always closely linked to and should reflect the methodology of the initial project appraisal. Now, in the first stage, we spoke of methodologies, different methodologies. We spoke of processes and we spoke of the phases. Now, when we look at monitoring and evaluation, what we are saying is it is linked to those phases. So every element within monitoring and evaluation is linked to a phase within the project that you are implementing or that you are monitoring. Key principles, continuing, information should be used in decision making. When you come up with a project, make sure that you are making an impact by the results that are coming, you need to report somewhere. It is not just for your own, even if it's a very small project that you are doing. And that is where stakeholders come in. Whether you are able to talk to a community councillor, a constituency councillor, or a county councillor. I don't know what are the structures in your country. We have constituencies at community level, and we always engage them, even if it's very small projects. We engage them in such, we report to them, we disseminate information, and we share with them the information that comes from the monitoring and evaluation process. And that is a small way in which you can influence policy or recommendations into policies. And then evaluation should follow a specific methodology designed to gather information about program success. Here, I want to talk about the fact that we need to understand that if the evaluation component per se is also part of research. M&E is part of research. We have different forms of research, and that is why when we talk monitoring and evaluation, we also want to talk of how you write research proposals. So the methodology, the research methodology should be designed to gather information about your program success. So when we talk of methodologies, we also want to look at the different methods in which you collect your data to feed the information that you are evaluating. So there are procedures that you follow. When you collect your data, you may decide you want to do a questionnaire. You may decide you want to do a focus group discussion. You may decide you want to do workshops and meetings. In monitoring and evaluation, the budgets are always looking at, are you conducting meetings with the beneficiaries, meetings with the stakeholders, meetings with whom you are collaborating with? We budget for such. We also do, like I said, focus group discussions, because that is where your qualitative data come from. If your methodology of data collection is qualitative, then you will do your focus group discussions. And when it is quantitative, you want to go into systems, you want to go into records as well. And then also, when it comes to the methodology, we also look at secondary data and primary data. In your secondary data, you want to talk of literature reviews or any form of reports that exist with regard to your programs and your field within which you are collecting data from. And that is the importance, key principles within monitoring and evaluation, the importance of keeping reports, the importance of data quality. It should respect the principles of participation and involve all program beneficiaries and stakeholders. It's important if you want success. And I want you to think back when we spoke of political leadership, when we spoke of public sector reform, the involvement or the voice of the beneficiaries, the voice of the stakeholders are just as important, because whom are you implementing a program for if you don't want to listen to your beneficiaries or your stakeholders? That is where your actual information comes from. And it should also respect and protect the rights and the welfare and the confidentiality of all the entities involved in the program. What we are saying is there is an ethical code of conduct that also governs our monitoring and evaluation. Remember, we spoke of research, and that is where the ethical code of conduct becomes very, very valid. There are ethics involved. You protect their rights, you protect their willingness to participate, you protect their dignity and the confidentiality of information as appropriate. So these are some of the key principles in monitoring and evaluation. Now, having spoken of the key principles, what is monitoring? Monitoring we define in different ways. One definition is it is a systematic process of collecting, analyzing, and using information to track a program's progress. It can track a business progress. It can track a project's progress. In government, we also use monitoring and evaluation a lot to see whether we are aligned with our country objectives, and it is happening at different levels depending on the quality or the type of program that you are implementing towards reaching its objectives and to guide management decisions. That is why the information is important. Now, many times we complain that we do not get a platform to speak. Your information collected through and submitted through monitoring and evaluation could be your voice being spoken if well presented. Monitoring usually focus on processes such as when and where activities occur, who delivers them, and how many people or entities they reach. Monitoring can be extremely detailed. And then it is conducted after a program has begun. We start monitoring after a program has begun. But remember, in the beginning, I said, if we plan our program, when we write our project, we should also visualize how we will monitor the progress. And that is why you will hear us speaking of smart indicators, smart goals, and smart objectives, because that is the brain that runs with the process of proposal writing. And that is an ideal time or an ideal process within which you want to come up with your monitoring and evaluation plan as well, or M&E plan in short. And then also, it is sometimes referred to as a process, performance, or formative evaluation. You will hear organizations will say formative evaluation. In our country, if you are a consultant, doesn't matter what field you are, there's quite a lot of consultancies for formative evaluations. And many times we just get in consultants to evaluate performance of a project, performance of a program, but that is evaluation. When we refer to evaluation, we will talk a bit more about that. Monitoring is also seen as routine tracking. The word tracking underlined, and it is routine of data to learn to what extent implementation is occurring and progress is being made. For example, tracking inputs and outputs. Very, very, very important. Tracking inputs and outputs. Any human being that is doing something within his life want to monitor and track whatever he or she is doing. In a project that we are sitting on here, we want to see how many people sign up, how many people, what is the uptake? You know, those are things that we are monitoring. We want to track how many individuals do something with the content and the information. I've asked tonight a question. How many are here on this platform that are working in projects? We want to see how many people are involved. These are forms of monitoring. And then outputs, we want to see with what I have invested, what is coming out of that. And then also the data indicates how programs are conducted and the interventions, whether the interventions are on track or on budget. Now, working on projects are very important. If you aspire to climb the ladder or to go to a next level in a project, especially if it's a long-term project, it's important for you to understand what is the heartbeat of the leadership or the visionary of the organization. If the heartbeat is figures, that is where your monitoring will be. If the heartbeat is individuals, that is where your monitoring will be. So it's important for us to understand, if we want to enjoy the monitoring process, it doesn't matter which angle of the organization you are working at. You do not need to be the monitoring and evaluation manager for you to know that. Now, we are saying that, are the interventions on track or on budget? That we evaluate on a monthly basis and sometimes on a daily basis. And earlier we said it is a team approach, and that is why all the different entities should be involved in monitoring and evaluation. You want to hear whether the budget monitoring is on track or on target, you want to first look at your project, and then you want to talk to your finance individuals. When you want to hear whether your targets, you want to talk to your program officers on the ground if it's figures. And then in terms of inputs and activities, who are your program facilitators? Who are your volunteers? Who are your project officers that you are working with on a daily basis? Or maybe that is yourself. So you need to keep your eyes on inputs and activities. And then also monitoring data indicates a program's level of performance. Are we performing? Are we moving? Are things happening? And if nothing is happening, what are we doing about it? Reaching the desired number of households, that is just an example, or individuals, depending on your target group. That is monitoring, just in a nutshell, explained to give you an idea. And then we have evaluation. Evaluation then is the systematic assessment of an activity or a project or a program or a strategy. It can also be a policy, it can be a topical theme, it can be a sector, it can be an operational area, or its institutional performance. That is evaluation. It already tells you the scope as compared to the mindset around the detail of monitoring. Evaluation focuses on expected and achieved accomplishments. It also looks at examining the results chain process and contextual factors and causality. Now, it's important for us to understand what is going wrong. What are the trends? Do we follow trends? What are the possible crises that we can expect? What are the challenges that we are facing? These are the issues that we are looking at in evaluation in order to understand achievement or lack of achievement. That is what evaluation is looking at. It aims at determining the relevance, the impact, the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the sustainability of interventions and the contributions of the intervention to the results achieved. So what evaluation is looking at, if my intervention is a training, I want to see that if the results are people are informed, you see a change in behavior, you see a reduction in certain types of diseases, then after the training, then before the training, then we are saying that it aims at determining or looking at the contribution of the intervention. So that will tell us the intervention, we are making an impact or we are having great outcomes. And we will talk about that as we are going. So that is your evaluation. Again, with evaluation, it is a systematic collection of information to learn why and to what extent a program has been successful or unsuccessful. And it ascertains, now remember, in monitoring, we are just collecting data. We keep track and so on, and we see whether we are keeping time. But with evaluation, we are looking at, is it successful or unsuccessful? And it ascertains whether the inputs and outputs are producing the desired results. That is evaluating the effectiveness. I have an example that I was commissioned as a consultant on a project about a year ago. And before that, there was nobody in the position. It was a country level position. And getting onto the project and going into the field and looking at what happened was in the middle of COVID-19 lockdown during the period of time in our country. And I had to implement it in schools. And during the period of time, schools were closed, but it was also holiday time for schools. So we went in with a training just to see what is happening. But we have discovered that we could not get any form of outcome, positive outcome. There was nothing. The project in itself, just to mention an example, was about teenage pregnancy, prevention of teenage pregnancies and child marriages. And after the lockdown, when we came back, that was the beginning, we discovered that the numbers of teenage pregnancies are 3 times as high as it has been before the project. Now, remember, before I came, there was a 6 months gap. There was nobody on the project. So these are the kind of things that evaluations are looking at, and it's looking at its effectiveness. Now, before that, the program started with a baseline study in order for us to determine need. Now, everything that has been invested there, if you look at it, there is not yet any form of outcome. And this kind of project is in danger, and we need to do corrective action. Evaluation data also indicate whether a program achieved what they were intended to achieve. That is the outcomes and the impact. And that is exactly what I've explained to you just now. Now, what is the process flow in monitoring and evaluation? We first start with our inputs. Remember, you have written at this stage, you've got a functional program. We said it starts after the program or project has started and it has been approved, and you have your plan in place. You now just follow the plan. We look at inputs. We look at activities. We look at outputs. We look at outcomes, and we look at impacts. If there's no inputs, then we cannot speak of activity. If there's no activity, we can't look at outputs. If there's no outputs, we cannot determine outcomes. And if there's no outcomes, we can't just jump onto impact. I always tell people that this process is a life process. It is not just programs. It's not just work. It's not just your finances. In all our lives, we have what we put in, the activities that we are engaging into, the outputs that come from those activities, what are the outcomes? And that is why in life, we stand and look back and say, I am this age. I have been doing this for so many years. What are the impacts that I am making in my community, in my environment, and even in my personal life? So this process flow is for everyone. And if you understand it like that, you'll be able to put your mind or your brain or align your mind to monitoring and evaluation process flow. But now we are going back to the developmental sector or to our projects, and we want to look at the process flow. When we talk of inputs, what are inputs all about? These are just simply examples. Inputs is look at what you are putting in to the process in order for it to be enhanced. It's about enhancement of the process. As money, it can be money, it can be the funds that come from the donors. It could be trained personnel or training personnel and staff. And then it could be other resources and supplies that you need to execute whatever program you have. And it could be other contributions, like, for example, giving funds for volunteers or coming up with processes where you can involve volunteers as well. Inputs can be anything that you need in order to enhance a process in your monitoring and evaluation process. And that, of course, is determined by the project. The project that I was just telling you about, that I was assigned to when I came, their inputs was already done. They've invested money into a baseline study. They've invested money into training teachers to implement this project into schools. They've invested money in coming up with school clubs. They've invested money in orientation meetings with the Ministry of Education, with National Task Force partners and stakeholders. They've invested money. So there was money involved, funds involved, trained personnel, or they were training personnel and other resources and supplies in the schools. They've given a lot of things for them to be able to run the project. And we had a volunteer, one key volunteer that we had to put within the project, a geographical site of the project. So those are inputs. Those are inputs. When you want to start up with your own project, in monitoring and evaluation, these are also things that you are going to look at. And the beauty of inputs is when you do your project in itself, you also look at inputs. These are things that can come from donors, but it can come from your own pocket as well. And one of the things I don't know whether I've mentioned yesterday, but I want to mention to you today, whenever you come up with any project, if I'm your donor, I'll always ask you, what do you bring to the table? If you are able to articulate that, I will validate you to qualify for the next round of funding. So it's important for us. Inputs is not what comes from external, but also what we are putting into a project. The same applies in monitoring and evaluation. You will give your time, you will give your commitment, you will give your dedication and everything. So that is inputs, the first part. When we talk of activities, the activity will then be your training workshops. It will be the execution of the baseline study. It will be the classes or teaching classes. It will mean develop curriculums because the organization has developed curriculums. It will mean supervision of the project. It will mean supervision of the clubs. It will mean oversight for the teachers as well that are implementing at school level. It will mean, you know, whatever activities we need to put into. Now remember, you've got your inputs. Your inputs should enhance the execution of the activities. Money has been given, training can take place. There are teaching classes, there's a curriculum, and there's supervision. So those are activities. And I think all of us involved here, whatever work you are doing, you are engaged in one or the other activity. Outputs, the outputs, what do we get out of that? If I want to use the same example, here we've got material has been distributed. In inputs, that would be material has been developed. And then also the number of students taught, the number of teachers trained, that's an output. And then also the number of people reached in the project, in this case, the number of learners reached in the project, or if it's a youth development, number of young people reached with whatever you are implementing. And then intervention sessions completed, the number of sessions completed. Those are outputs. Now, after your inputs, that is actually the deliverable output. Look at what has been delivered. What has been delivered. Follow me. Your outcomes. Outcomes want to speak of results. Outcomes, are there any changes in knowledge? Are there any changes in behavior? Are there any changes in attitude? Are there any changes in skills? If it is a developmental project, maybe the project is about malnutrition and you have come up with a food security project in your community. Are there any changes in the percentage of children that die of malnutrition? Or if it is in the case of education, is there any increase in the number of children that now has access to education? So these are outcomes, and outcomes are evaluated over a certain period of time, evaluated. So over a certain period of time is not as immediate as monitoring. And then also impact is now your long-term result, your long-term result. Possible examples is health and longevity improved. In other words, it's nutrition programs. If you want to think impact, you want to think long-term. Violence against children decrease, that is an impact. Decrease in HIV mortality and morbidity, less people die of HIV, that's an impact. Improved economy or education programs, savings and loans, or if we want to say we've improved quality of life for all the people by giving them pure water or better water supplies, we've improved quality of life by giving better ICT infrastructure or road infrastructure. We've improved on, or there's less road accidents, less deaths on roads because the improved road infrastructure. Those are impacts. Impact you want to evaluate over a long period of time, but impact you also want to evaluate when you want to see what the government is presenting to you after a period of time you have voted for them. Those are impacts. Now remember just the tip. The other time we spoke of what we are looking at when we are choosing people to lead us. We are looking at the impact that they are making. So this is the process flow in monitoring and evaluation. Important in monitoring and evaluation are our indicators. It is a written measure used to demonstrate change in a situation or progress. I call it a measuring tool. It measures change, it measures results or an activity, but it's a measuring tool. It speaks of the number of individuals that benefited from a program. Those are indicators. The number of children taken up in local orphanages, the number of young people that accessed education, the number of young people that got bursaries, the number of young people that went through the youth development programs. You know, these are indicators. It must be very specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. So those are your indicators. Indicators are we usually do workshops to develop indicators on its own in every sector, small or large projects. We develop indicators. It's always a team approach, and this is where your stakeholders also play a very, very major role. When you do indicators workshops, evaluate who are your individuals that are good at figures, if it's about figures, that are very meticulous with analysis, if it is about things that you need to analyze. But we need people that are into detail when we develop indicators. Indicators, it's important that every individual in the organization understand the indicators at which their performance is measured within a project. Very, very important. The indicators I've indicated here is for an overall project. But there will also be indicators if my job is to be a finance manager or a finance officer within a project, there will be indicators, and those will be what we call performance indicators that will measure the impact of my work or my contribution towards the project. And that is for every individual, every structure, every group that is part of the project. It is so very important, because if you don't have a measuring tool, you cannot measure anything in these processes that I have mentioned. Every process has its own indicators. We have our input indicators, we have our output indicators, we have our outcome indicators, we have our impact indicators. So we need to understand that. If you are running a school, a leadership school, you've got your indicators at every angle, at every point of the process. If your projects grow larger, you have people that you employ that work within these different components or departments. If you have a small project and you are managing it with a small team, all the indicators apply in accordance to the size of that which you are monitoring or implementing. So that is indicators. The difference between the monitoring and evaluation process, at the end, we want to understand that monitoring tracks what we are doing, primarily inputs and outputs. Inputs and outputs, monitoring happens mostly at that angle to assess whether programs are performing according to plan and are we doing things right. Because the beauty of monitoring is if you are not doing things right, and you identify it early, you can still get on track. And with evaluation, it assesses if we have achieved the desired results. Outcomes and impact in most cases is evaluation. So when we talk research, you'll find it is just a different form of evaluation, different termed evaluation, and all the research methods apply within an evaluation, all up depending on the type of research that you are doing. So that is also another angle of monitoring and evaluation. It's also asking us, are we doing the right things? Why do we do monitoring and evaluation? And for me to have understood this was to look at my personal life, and I want you to look at your personal life. Why do you do monitoring and evaluation? It's like asking, why am I budgeting? Why am I controlling a budget? It's the same principle. And I used to say to colleagues or to my teams that the way you manage resources in an organization and monitor resources in an organization is a reflection to me of how you manage and monitor your own life. So if you are a person who don't love figures and don't like observation and detail, monitoring and evaluation is not for you. But one thing I can advise you is the higher you go in your career, the more you will end up in either evaluating or monitoring. So monitoring and evaluation is, at the end of the day, a specialized area, but you cannot become the specialist if you did not go through the general process. That is what monitoring and evaluation tells us. To ensure effective and efficient use of resources and provide accountability to donors. Now, accountability to donors. I always say there's a statement where we say the donors are always right. It's just because they are holding on to the money. But also, if you take somebody's money, then you are accountable for that. On the first day, I said, be careful of what you promise. Be realistic in what you are promising. Donors know if you promise unrealistic if you make unrealistic promises. It's also to assess whether the project has achieved its objectives and has the desired effects. It helps to improve programs. We constantly monitor our lives, our environment, and that is how we do with the programs and the work that we are doing. And to learn from our activities and provide information to design future projects. Very important. One of the key issues that I'm doing on this particular project that I am now putting together, where I said they totally failed, I am identifying and extracting new areas for new projects, new funding, and new programs. I'm also keeping my ears on the ground. If I hear something about funding, calls for proposals, I'm looking at donors so that I can see how I can match the new areas that I want to venture this program into with the existing funding. So that is an important area. And then also to improve the program, to learn our activities and provide information to design future projects. We mentioned that, and to make decisions about project management and service delivery and broader. Now, we must make decisions about service delivery. Sometimes your evaluation can tell us, here we have to change direction without changing our program objectives. It will tell you where to scale up. It will tell you where to come up with catch-up programs. There was a time I can remember in one of my previous projects where I discovered that the way funding is used as compared to the way programs or targets are met are not matching, and that was dangerous. So I had to ask every single individual department to come up with a cost savings plan, despite the fact that we had plans in place. The second thing, I had to bring the whole team together, and I had to sensitize them as to the direction we are going, because definitely there was somehow misappropriation of funding taking place. And because funding issues are sensitive, it was not just a straightforward getting people together and squeezing answers out of them. We had to do a team building approach. And out of the team building, we sensitized everyone. Then we gave them a finance session, crash course for those who never went through it, and a basic and a refresher for those who went through it, just telling them what is happening in the organization, showing them a sustainability strategy, sending them back into the different sites of operation, and then we could work on the finances. After that, immediately, we asked the finance department or the finance committee to revise the finance policy so that we can see whether there are any loopholes that make us to or to allow these things to happen within the finance department. So that is what you want to do with the results that come from evaluations. Fundamental steps to carry out M&E. Number one step is you must construct a logical model or a log frame or a theory of change for your program. Now, whatever you use, your logical model or log frame is just the same thing. And the theory of change is dependent on the nature of the program. this particular program that I'm working on, they use theory of change. Theory of change is basically how the one part of the process influence the other part, and then the outcome, what you are getting, because we're working with three categories. We work with girls, we work with boys, and we work with youth, young people and young adults. And then thirdly, secondly, you need to develop an M&E plan, a monitoring and evaluation plan. Now, it's always good. The beauty of a log frame is you can always go back to the log frame and make adjustments and changes and so on. And you must have a monitoring and evaluation plan. You must have a plan. I cannot overemphasize. We spoke of planning on day one. Now, the importance of that kind of plan is that when you align the plan is part of the processes of project management process. So when you have an M&E plan, you see where it fits into the entire process. And then you select indicators. Donors will always ask you, what is your monitoring and evaluation plan? Now, when it's a concept note, you can just write it in 2, 3, 4 lines. But when it's a full proposal, of course, you have your plan ready. You need to select your indicators. I cannot tell you indicators here as I'm sitting, because your indicators will be determined by the nature of your program, the type of program that you are doing. And then also collect information on the selected indicators. So when you have selected indicators, let's say, for example, like we said, it's a youth development program to sensitize young people, to prepare them to go into the job market. Now you have your indicators there. What are you looking at? What type of training they get, the number of trainings, the number of individuals, institutions that you will target, how you will prepare them, number of programs you have prepared or laid out. These are the kind of things that we are looking at. Now, what we are saying is, if you have selected the number of young people, the number of institutions, the number of projects, if your projects are only one, set of projects, for example, you're only conducting, training them how to pass an interview or how to look for a job. That is where your indicators will come from, and that is how you will select your information. You will get that information to feed the indicator that you are having. So your indicator will determine the kind of information that you have selected. Okay, so analyze the information gathered. Now you have your information, you need to do an analysis. Now, analysis in monitoring and evaluation can be very interesting. As I said earlier, if you are not into figures or into technical stuff, then you either expand your knowledge, become curious, upgrade your knowledge, or you just make sure that you get your work done if you are in a position where you can employ somebody to do the work, because we've got different ways of analyzing the data. Qualitative data, we do qualitative analysis of these data. We come up with themes. The beauty of qualitative data is that is where we extract new areas of new programming, new areas for funding, new projects or new things that are evolving on the ground. You can identify new challenges or challenges that have been overlooked in the startup process of the project. So that is the beauty of the qualitative data analysis. The qualitative data speaks of people's feelings, their opinions, their values, and it comes out. And then when it comes to quantitative data analysis, you can use different methods or different software methods. If it's health projects, people usually use SPSS, social science projects. And if it is epidemiology, we use EpiInfo. There's so many softwares that are being used. If it's finance, you can use a Navision program. Different types of programs are there. But then also, if you are in a position where you can empower people, train somebody in those, or train yourself in understanding different databases. It is very, very interesting, especially if you are not into such, but you need to increase your knowledge in that. And then compare results with your program initial goals. You go back to your goals. You go back to your objectives. You go back to your logical frameworks as well. So you compare the results. Now, comparison of the results is a process on its own. all individuals or stakeholders sit together, you have your meetings, give your feedbacks, and then also you share the data and you use the data. We said earlier, stakeholders must be informed on the data, and stakeholders must use the data. So what we do in sharing data is we have our annual reports. And your annual report can be your tool for your next donor funding, can be your tool for your next budgetary process. And in one of the organizations where I worked we decided that we will do our work as an organization for overseas, but we will also do a campaign at the same time. So we used our great reports that we had for that year on the different programs and projects, and we approached the Minister of Gender Equality and Child Welfare, and we went to make a proposal for them to increase grants for children, and she had to go and table it in Parliament. And it was so good because our reports came out at an opportune time, and she needed to go and table something different from what the previous ministers had to table every year. So that is what, and we had a discussion with her, everything, and the team had the data so well outlined. And we went in there with a presentation, and we had to do a convincing, some bit of advocacy needed, and we had her taking and tabling that which we came up with. So that is the importance of the usage of data. Data is also used in planning, future planning. It is also used in budgeting, future budgeting. It is also used in future programming. So there's so many uses of data. It's also, we use our data. When I worked with the International Labour Organization, our data was helping students that were doing research in child labor. That was law students at the University of Namibia. And then also the law faculty would get data from us. They would send, part of our work was to be just a hub or a resource center. So these are the interesting uses of data. Now, all the different components that I'm having here, the 7 components, you could be very good in one of the areas, and that should be your specialty. Remember, I said earlier that when I was building my career, I always had a goal that wherever I go and work, I want to increase my knowledge in something. And these are the kind of areas that you can look at. You can develop the passion for data or working with data if you do not yet have that. You can develop the passion for writing proposals or just writing concept notes. And that is how you become very, very useful in taking up projects. If you want to be a future leader, have the mindset of writing concept notes, identifying need, looking at data. And even after this session that we are having here, you should be able to go out into your own company, organization, and look at data and see whether the data are good, whether it's quality data. You will be able to identify some of these things. And also just a reminder, what I'm giving you tonight is very, very basic, but it's very, very foundational for future planning and development, even career development as well. So again, the process, I'm just giving you the process here so that you can understand that we need to have a logical framework. You cannot have the framework if you don't have this mindset. I was trying to get in more examples, but I could not get my documents, so I will leave you with links tonight. Now, the process flow, this is how it looks. If you wish, you have your indicators here. Remember, I said indicators are measuring tools. You have your indicators here, and you can define how it is calculated if it needs to be calculated. It's not all indicators that are calculated. In some cases, they use a baseline. What is the current value? The baseline comes from the baseline results if a study has been conducted. What we had to do in some cases when we did the family strengthening programs, we had to use the baseline as the population of that particular constituency. Against the population of the constituency. That was our baseline. We worked it out like that. And then what is the target value? And your target, it could be a target or it can be a value if it's figures or data source. How will it be measured? What are you going to use? And then the frequency, how often will it be measured? How often are we going to report? How often are we going to collect data? Who will measure it? And then the reports. Where will it be reported? Okay, so in every situation, you will have your goals, you will have your outcomes, and you will have your outputs. And then, of course, like we said earlier, your impacts as well. So this is just an indication of what it will look like when you have your M&E process flow. There's no information in there as an example because you can use tools. I'm going to share tools that you can put in your own, go back to your own organization and see what tools they have in place and work with that. But this is just for you to understand. Now, let me tell you a secret. If you want to understand M&E, if you look at indicated definition, baseline, if you understand that, you will be able to interpret any process flow. And how will you interpret it? Whatever you don't understand, you'll be able to ask relevant questions. That is how we learn in M&E. That is how we learn. And this is before you decide to study monitoring and evaluation or to study research. Now, I wasn't able to give a proper, but this one I've just pasted here for you. This is just a log frame. Okay, this is a log frame. And this is more of a strategic plan than an M&E plan. But log frames are practically the same. Here on the left-hand side, you've got your overall objective, what your objective there, and then your specific objective. Overall will be to champion, as let's say the organization is SOS, as a professional social development and humanitarian actor, which is trusted, respected, and whatever. And then you have your specific objective. And then you have under strategy, your expected results. I've given 2 examples there. And there should be IPD, institutional partnership development. That means it's a fundraising, it's a log frame for a fundraising strategy. And then you have your key performance indicators. Now, here is, remember I said performance indicator, the number of and success rate of applications of institutional funds increases the number of institutional donors, and then you see at the bottom under expected results, the staff has improved competencies in the areas of PCM and DCM that has got to do with project management, and then also increase awareness and buying in by senior management teams and board members on IPD, which stands for Institutional Partnership Development. That means donor funding from UN and all the international agencies. And then at the bottom, you have under acquisition, you've got increased number of contracts and income from institutional partners. Contracts means we've signed agreement with UNICEF, we've signed agreement with USAID, we've signed agreement. So this is just key performance indicators, but this of course is a national, it's a high level program that it's referring to. And then you have your key performance indicators, outputs. Now this is for inputs, the number 1, that should be for outputs. Number of staff trainings conducted. And then look here, they are training their staff on a regular basis. And then also number of sensitization sessions held for senior management. And then when it comes to acquisition, existence of market research. So they are those kind of indicators. And then we look at targets, annual income, international funds, 2.5 million by 2020. And then when you look at your expected results under capacity development, 1 training either on PCM or DCM per year, and then also when it comes to 4 sessions per year, and then also market research under acquisition. Market research has been done. So under your activities, there's basically what the activities are, what needs to be done in order for that. Training needs to be done, sensitization needs to be done, and then also donor mapping needs to be done. Weekly monitoring and funding opportunities need to be done. And then resources of verification, how are we going to verify? Now, when we do monitoring and evaluation, we look at all these. So this is just an idea, but what we normally do is we do strategic planning. where our monitoring and evaluation program comes in. If you can, in whichever angle you are, if you have a voice or in your personal organization, you need to help people to understand the value of strategic planning. Let me give you an example of what worked. I'm very passionate about strategic planning, more passionate than monitoring and evaluation, because it helps me to do proper monitoring and evaluation, to write excellent proposals, project proposals, to make sure that I execute donor funding with absolute care and commitment and diligence. So in strategic planning, it's strategy, it's strategic thinking that is going into that. And what I used to do to make it easy for myself, you can make use of this or not, depending on the size of your program. I would have objectives, strategic objectives, and I would have a trained, mentored, or coached objective leader for every objective. If they are not trained or coached or mentored, it is my area to coach them into position. They pick a strategy, a strategic objective, and they become an objective leader. It becomes a performance issue. You make sure that if they are salaried staff, they get something is added to the level of effort for that position. We meet quarterly, and they must indicate themselves how the organization has met its targets within that particular objective. And then from the quarterly meetings, we prepare for our annual strategic planning. And our annual strategic planning, we would invite our international office individuals, fundraising department, regional heads of programs, and everyone. And we do the dialogue, we call it a general secretariat dialogue with them. And when we do this process, I sit back. I can be the director or I can be the CEO. I sit back. My strategic objective leaders, each one takes the lead and they represent the organization. So I would have one for programs. I would have one for HR. I would have HR is human resource management. I would have one for fund development and communications. I would have one for youth development. I would have one for whatever other program area is there is, one for programs as well. And I would sit back and they do the presentations. And when they do the presentations, they get interrogated by this international team, including the donors. And wherever they get stuck, questions are referred. I only come in where they get stuck. But we do a workshop prior to that for them to tell us already what they're looking at for the next year. We analyze it, we scrutinize it, we sit back. When the meeting happens, I sit back. They do the work. I've got an empowered team at the end of the day. They know M&E, they're able to train others, and they are able to advocate for their organization. And that is how you raise leaders for future. When you step off or you step out, you know that somebody can take over. That is how we want to do our monitoring and evaluation, because monitoring and evaluation is about the lifespan of an organization. I think I'm going to end there for tonight. And I will take comments, inputs, and if we are done, we can call it an evening. Thank you very much. Any questions, or you want to type something in the chat box? If you don't want to speak. If you can hear me, you can type something in the chat box if you don't wish to speak. Thank you. Thank you very much. There don't seem to be any questions. But for those of you that are working on programs and that have questions, there are individuals that are asking if they can get my perspective or my input. I'd be very happy to do that. I'd be very happy to do that. I'm very passionate about project management, and also for those who want to develop their careers in project management, please feel free. That's also one of my areas that I'm very, very passionate about. Yeah, it's one of the areas that you can grow in and develop in and make a huge contribution to your nation without having a top position as a leader. So from my side, yes, thank you so much. Thank you for the inputs and the questions. Okay, if there's nothing, I think we can call it a day. I'm going to stop sharing the slides unless somebody wants to say something. Alrighty, I don't know if you can hear me, but for those individuals that want me to give them more information, social media handles and so on, I can leave my email if that is